Message from the Senate. Madam Speaker, I hereby announce that the Senate has concurred in and adopted the report of the Conference Committee on Senate File number 3567, an act relating to education. The message is signed Thomas S. Boddard, Secretary of the Senate. Conference Committee report on Senate File number 3567. And the report is addressed to the Honorable Bobby Joe Champion, President of the Senate, the Honorable Melissa Hortman, Speaker of the House. We, the undersigned conferees for Senate File number 3567, report that we've agreed upon the items in dispute and recommend as follows. The report is signed by 3 of the 3 members on the part of the Senate and 2 of the 3 members on the part of the House.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Pryor, on the motion to adopt.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Yes, that is my motion. We do have an education policy bill that's returned now from Conference Committee. And I just want to highlight some of the things that did change in the report that's coming back to us after our discussions with our colleagues in the Senate. First of all, there is currently a modified version of the Senate's book ban prohibition that's included. This was a bill that was heard in our committee. It was voted out of committee and sent to Judiciary for further work. Some of the work that we had wanted to do on that prohibition of banning books we were not able to accomplish in this session. So it's pretty much the version that was heard originally. Some further clarification of his work, and I do want to give credit to Representative Frazier for improving the bill that was originally sent over us from the Senate. There's also modified language from the Senate about American Indian mascots. We are requiring now that school districts with prohibited American Indian mascots to report to the legislature by February 14th, 2025, and again in the year 2026, with confirmation that they have removed the prohibited mascots from their websites and approved a new one. And there's some more information relating to that too. We've also added instruction by tribal, spiritual, and cultural advisors to the statute, allowing schools to grant excused absences for up to 3 hours each week for religious instruction. We're allowing smudging in public schools. We're requiring schools to consult with their local paraprofessional unions when determining what trainings to offer their paras. This was language that was originally carried in the finance bill that's moved over now to education policy. We're requiring Minnesota State High School League to provide eating disorder prevention education to coaches. We heard this bill again in our committee. We left it without requiring them now, but the Senate thought that it was so important that we should require the high school league to provide this education. And then finally, or another couple ones, we have new language that encourages schools to adopt a policy on parental notification when a student is removed from class from an unscheduled purpose, and requires school districts to consult with child abuse prevention experts in developing these policies. Now, this is and encourage school districts to do it. This is important work that we want to keep continuing, which we know that there have been tragic incidences in schools where adult figures of authority have taken advantage of students. And we want to continue that work to make sure that this cannot happen again in our schools. We want to encourage our districts to put in place any policies that would be able to prevent this. So this was a beginning of that work that's in this education policy bill, and I think that will be work that we continue on as a body to talk about these policies that would prevent abuse like this happening ever again to a child in our Minnesota schools. Also from the Senate, we are changing the name of the accountability system. It had been called World's Best Workforce. The new name will be Comprehensive Achievement and Civic Readiness. So I guess we say CACRA, unless somebody comes up with a better way of arranging those letters. There are some of the provisions that we're not able to get across the finish line through the Senate. There are some changes to the PSEO language. Representative Erdahl's amendment about a model policy for school districts for dissemination of private sexual images was not a policy that was adopted from the conference committee. I tried somewhat. Then also, in terms of, one thing we had a lot of discussion on is the publications, how school districts use publications in their local newspapers, and those newspapers that have folded and school districts are not left with that means. It turns out that Litchfield and Hutchinson now have local publications that they can continue, so what was originally in that amendment was dropped out because it was no longer a need for those particular districts. So we kept up with current events with our language in our bill. So other changes, and this was something that was discussed thoroughly in committee and then was also discussed on the floor, was the dates for reporting statewide assessments deadlines. And this was about how MDE consolidates the reporting, and then when they have to report that on a statewide level. So originally in the bill, both in the House and the Senate, September 1st was or it had been December 1st, it was moved to December. We took and had a long discussion with MDE about the earliest that they can report these things, because it is important to families to get this consolidated information about school districts. So we worked out a compromise where that date has been moved up again. And there's just certain exceptions where that will be reported later. So this sounds like very technical, in the weeds, but it does have an impact. And I can say that it does show the good work of committees and floor debates, that we kept raising this as an issue that people cared about, and it was a change that we did make in the final conference committee bill. Then also a change, but not really of the work that we've done as a body. The language from early childhood that was just policy was moved into this education policy bill, so that you'll see this here. We had passed it off the floor in a different bill originally. And then also the policy provisions related to the READ Act is now in the education policy bill. And again, this would, before had been carried in education finance, it was moved over just the policy part into education policy. So education policy does talk about the READ Act and literacy in schools, which is a change which I'm kind of glad to see that we have in our bill right now. So those are some of the highlights, folks, and I hope that we can pass this on and get it to the governor.
The member from Freeborn, Representative Bennett.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move to not adopt the conference committee
Representative
report.
Bennett moves to
request a roll
refuse
call.
to adopt the conference committee report, requests a roll call. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Representative Bennett.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And first of all, I just want to thank Representative Chair Pryor and all the conference committee members, including those on the Senate side. I think the process was great. It was very transparent. I felt I was kept in the loop, and I appreciate that very much. And there are some excellent components in this conference committee report. The MCA delaying of those MCA reports was fixed. That's important to many people, including parents and community members. The mascot change compromise delay there, I think, is important as well. And I could go on about some others, but there are three main concerns that I have with this report that I believe really it needs to be sent back because of that. One of them is just this focus on prohibiting book banning. Okay, this is an issue that you see it all over social media by the governor and so on. And honestly, members, this is an obfuscation of the real matter in our schools. And that is that for children who can't read, every book is banned. And at this point, as you've heard over and over on this floor and in committee, we have less than half of our Minnesota students who can read at grade level. It's less for math and less for science. This is concerning. So we're sitting here focusing on this book ban issue, which is quite rare in Minnesota, when we have kids who can't read any book. That's not appropriate. That is not right. 500,000 kids in this state cannot read at grade level right now. For those kids, every book is banned. Another issue I have here is with the READ Act, which I support the underlying drive of this READ Act. I think it's important, the science of reading and so on. But it was overregulated and underfunded in my mind, but it's at least a start. But in this committee report, we have actually rolled back our READ Act. We're focusing more now on radical ideology that would actually ban curriculum on what, and instead we should be focusing on what our children can do and get them up to grade level in reading. So that concerns me greatly. I know some of other members are going to speak to that as well. And then the last fact, we have mandates. Last session, we had 65 new mandates. Our districts talked about them a lot in our committees, called it torpedoes. We had a salvo of mandates last session, and now we've added more mandates this session. That's unacceptable. Our schools are trying to play catch up with the mandates from last session. How can we expect them to take more on? We have a twin crisis right now in literacy and in our student attendance. This report, in my mind, needs to focus on those things strongly, and it doesn't. So, Madam Speaker, again, I just move not to adopt this, and I again thank Chair Pryor and conference committee members. It was a good process, but in the outcome, the content is just not acceptable in my mind. Thank you.
The member from Scott, Representative Bakeberg.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, members. I want to just thank Chair Pryor for her work throughout our committee work, but also just her time serving here in the legislature. I think it's important to recognize her work and representing her community. Representative Bennett talked about some of the good components of this bill, and there are some pieces that are helpful. I really appreciate, we had robust conversations about the MCA reporting timelines and just how that, frankly, was illogical. So I appreciate that feedback was taken and we corrected that issue. The publications for newspapers, that has a significant impact on my local communities that I represent, so that will be helpful. But as I was walking up to the chamber today, I ran into a teacher and a football coach. So he introduced himself. I won't say where he was from, just to not out him too much. But he was walking with his group of kids, and we just had a conversation about how are things going at your school. And basically, to sum it up, what he talked about was, God, I thought we were going to get all this money, but we just got hammered with mandates. And I think that's the piece. You know, we saw it in the Reformer article, and it was interesting. I had a constituent reach out and was pushing back on some of my conversation, and I showed him the Reformer article right after session, and it was talking about how historic investments in schools. And then I sent him the Reformer article just before we started in February, and how the narrative was very, very different. And I think the bottom line is, whether it be in the Reformer article talking about the 65 mandates, whether it be me talking to an educator in the stairwell here at the Capitol, the mandates, schools are still trying to get unburied from these mandates of last session, the 65 mandates. Not my number, the Reformers' number. So we should be, and that's why I would support the motion to re-refer, we should be going back and looking at how we can peel back some of those. We didn't do that this session, and that's unfortunate. We missed an opportunity to really help our schools. We missed an opportunity to say, you know what? Maybe what we wanted to do last session wasn't the right thing to do. We missed an opportunity to show some humility and say, let's go back and fix that. But instead, we are growing the Department of Education, and while school districts across the state are cutting their budgets. I mean, I think we just need to let that sink in. We're growing the department, and school districts are cutting their budget. We have a crisis of literacy. We have to get this right. And we talked extensively about how we can't bow down to people that frankly don't want to change and do hard work. We need to push back against that, and we've regressed, and I'm disappointed in that. Student attendance, we'll talk about that in the finance bill, but we have got to, and I think there's some consensus, I know there's consensus across the board to be able to address student attendance. And this whole idea of book banning is extremely frustrating. When you look at data, since Governor Walz has taken office, reading scores are down 16%. And the simple fact is, if a kid can't read every single book, when they go to the library, whether there's a licensed librarian in there or not, that kid can't read that book. So every book is banned to a kid that can't read. I would encourage, let's re-refer this and let's get this right, because if we don't, our schools are going to have to implement our poor decisions.
The member from Mauer, Representative Mueller.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, members. And I would also encourage us to refuse to adopt this conference committee report and send it back. This needs some more work. You've heard it from my colleagues, and you're going to hear it again, probably over and over and over again. There are simply things in here that are taking us backwards instead of forward. And of course, my whole career, I have been focusing on literacy. That's what I've been trained in. It's what I've been, my whole studies have been. And I know the fight that we had to get our reading instruction changed. And while I couldn't support the original bill because we can't somehow use the word science of reading, I understand the fight that was there to move this issue to the front. And to know that now we are going to give $1 million, I know this is a policy bill, but that we're giving this money to a third party to look for culturally responsive or culturally destructive material even after it was approved. We are superseding whether it works to making sure that it's not culturally destructive. This is a step backwards, members. A good teacher, and we know all of the good teachers, they have worked so hard. An effective teacher will take any material and make it relevant to their students. And I'm all for making sure there's mirrors and windows and all those things. But you cannot compromise on making something effective. Explicit instruction. And it looks as if you read the language, and which FYI, 65 plus mandates, and we're supposed to be having a supplemental, this is a non-budget year, and we're supposed to kind of go through and look at some of the policies and fix it. We have this giant bill, ladies and gentlemen. We should be going back and repealing, and yet we have this giant thing. Page 64, if you can believe it, page 64, upon approval of the evidence-based interventions. So let me translate, meaning it works, right? Evidence-based, that's what we want it to be. I mean, it should say science of reading. But according to this, it's evidence-based models. The department must ensure the models are reviewed by a contracted third party for culturally responsive guidance and materials. And if they're not, you have to find something else. Sorry, it works. Sorry, it's actually doing what we wanted to do with the science of reading, but it's culturally destructive. So try again. And then, what's more egregious, members, if you look on page 65, it says that we have ongoing review of the literacy materials and that they can partner with one or more of the institution of higher education to conduct independent and objective reviews. I don't know how independent and objective someone can be when they already believe the science of reading is racist, and they have made that explicitly clear. When the higher education institutions have made that explicitly clear, why are we partnering with them to say, oh, one or more of the institutions of higher education can conduct an independent and objective review? They are not objective on this. They already have a preset idea, and they have told us that already. They have told us that. And so this is not a good provision. This is moving us backwards. If our goal was saying, listen, our reading instruction legislation that was adopted back in the early 2000s, it wasn't enough to really push forward explicit and instruction. If it wasn't doing enough, when we're going to change that, and we took a step forward, and we took a step in the right direction. But it's still, as we have said, it is not enough to prevent some bad actors from continuing the failed policies that are allowing our children to basically be illiterate. Not because of our teachers, because our teachers are learning the things that they're being taught in the higher education. This needs to be going right back to our higher education institutes and saying, what are you doing? What are you doing to make sure that our teachers know how to teach reading? Because right now, as you've heard so many times, half of our students can't read at grade level. It's unacceptable. I saw several people at the Literacy Day at the Capitol. Today a reader, tomorrow a leader. How about we do some leading in this chamber and stand up for the science of reading and actually prioritize good instruction? We are seeing that this READ Act was overregulated and underfunded. The money didn't go to our classroom, and the poor attempt that we're trying to quickly fix this is actually a step backwards. This is not a good addition to this bill, members, and it should be going back. We need to refuse to adopt so that we can send this back to conference. It does not hold our teacher preparation programs accountable, and those who actually oppose the science of reading still are there trying to offer CEUs to our teachers for reading instruction. Come and take our course. We don't actually believe in the science of reading, but go ahead and do this. It will count for your reading CEUs. That should have been addressed right here in this piece of legislation, and it is not. This denied good teachers the skills they needed and robbed them of the tuition that they wasted on failed instruction from our higher institute. This should have been addressed in this piece of legislation. It is not. You have heard me over and over talk about how every child, when we talk about when every child can't read, when any child can't read, that every book is banned. You've heard that over and over again. I've said it in conference, I've said it in committee, I've said it on this floor. I don't know how many times we have to say it. When a child can't read, every book is banned. This is a distraction. Minnesota, this is a distraction. The majority party wants you to focus on this because they don't want you to focus on the fact that their failed policies are not teaching children how to read.
Point of order, Madam Speaker.
Representative Jordan, for what purpose do you rise?
I rise to a point of order under Mason's 124. Personalities and motives are not permitted in debate. Saying Democrats want this is putting motives into the debate, and I ask you to rule on this.
I would ask members to please not assign motives to other people other than themselves. Representative Mueller.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, the facts are actually there, and I will not impugn any motives, but you've heard it lots and lots of times. Let's just look at statistics, ladies and gentlemen. Reading proficiency is down 16% since 2019. This isn't the pandemic. This is when Governor Walz took office. Math proficiency is down 17%. Science proficiency down 23%. Graduate rates are stagnant. But instead of focusing on how we can actually focus on the science of reading, we're focusing on book banning. This is a distraction, ladies and gentlemen. This is a distraction. You should be focusing on that every book is banned for a child that doesn't know how to read. That's what you'd be focusing on. Don't be swayed. Don't be fooled that we're actually getting something done. Focus on the fact that our children don't know how to read. That's what this legislation should have done, and it doesn't. The last thing that I want to talk about, and you've already heard it so many times from colleagues on this side of the aisle, is that there are mandates upon mandates upon mandates upon mandates. Received a letter, and it looks like it's gone to everyone on the Education Committee, so hopefully you took the time to read it. Too much of the new money was earmarked too precisely, and as I'm seeing, we are not getting enough of it in our small rural districts compared to metro areas. The funding we received is targeting the wrong areas and not hitting the classroom. Our small district is preparing to spend $133,000 on unemployment costs. That takes general dollars away from our classrooms into pockets of employees who are not working. High school requirements set by legislature are shaping high school schedules. This limits opportunities to students. We need to stop creating legislation from the extreme cases that just get your attention. It's ridiculous that we do that. Education Minnesota should not be the driver of legislation either. Their interests are not always in line with the teachers across the state, and I hear that often from our staff. I would strongly encourage spending more time listening to local board members, and I worry that in the last 2 years, St. Paul have created an unprecedented amount of policy that governs our schools. Why do we even need local school boards if St. Paul is just going to take over the policy role? A lot of damage was done last year, and I'm worried that more will be done this year. Maybe we should listen to the teachers that are actually doing the job, school board members that are actually doing the job, representing the teachers and the students who are there, instead of holding fast to some ideology that isn't working in our classrooms. Members, vote green with me to refuse to adopt, because we cannot pass this legislation as it stands today. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The member from Anoka, Representative Scott.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to the conferees on the Education Policy Committee, Conference Committee. And I have a strong need here. That's why I rose to speak to this bill. I represent Anoka-Hennepin, the largest school district in the state. And going to their pre-legislative meeting that they have for legislators, they only had 3 priorities this year. But you know what one of those was? To address this out-of-control disciplinary policy, where a second grader bloodies another second grader and has no consequences. That little second grader is running the classroom. We have a problem with teachers quitting early because they just can't take it anymore. Because we policymakers have decided that we're going to tell them how to run their classroom and what works best for them. That's no way to operate a classroom. To Representative Bennett and Mueller, you know, one of the reasons that our kids can't read is because there's so much distraction going on in the classroom that they keep getting interrupted by out-of-control children that the teacher can't do anything about. Is it any wonder that they're not learning? I'd be really interested to know when we pass that disciplinary problem for no expulsions and no suspensions for these kids. I think it was during COVID. But I would love to see if it corresponds with the decline over the years in test scores. I'm going to guess that it does. Members, that's no way to run a classroom. We're not doing those kids any favors if they're not being held accountable for their out-of-control actions. That's only going to escalate as they get older. And I know I'm going to guess, but everybody sitting in this chamber today has heard about this issue from their schools. Or maybe from a parent whose kid has been the victim of an out-of-control student in the classroom. But their kid has to go back to that same classroom with that same, naughty student. Nobody's learning. In fact, I had a teacher say, yeah, we have to if there's one child having a temper tantrum or a meltdown or throwing chairs or whatever, we have to pick up all the other students and walk them out of the classroom while parents sit in the classroom with the out-of-control student. It's wrong. And the conference committee should have addressed this issue. There's no excuse for not addressing it. If you want to raise test scores, start here. Please vote to refuse to adopt this conference committee report. Send them back to the drawing board and do something about this disciplinary policy problem.
The member from Washington, Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I'd like to piggyback on what Representative Scott just talked about. And actually, this provision was adopted last year. So in 6 months since this happened, we've had incredible problems all across our school districts. I've heard this same breakfast, legislative breakfast, the Stillwater Area School District, that is their #1 problem. And it's causing teachers to leave. It's causing pain and issues for the superintendents, for the principals. It's all about these kids that no longer can be disciplined, and they're harming every other kid. We have had a lot of kids disenroll out of the schools, either go homeschooling or private schools because of this issue. And it's just wrong. So when our schools are talking about lowering or that they're getting less and less students, and because of it, they are asking for more and more dollars to help fund things, but the problem is actually things that were created by this legislature. I would think that in the second year of the biennium that the policy bill would be taking a look at, hey, what was passed last year, what's working, what's not working, and put some, try to do what we can to help the things that are working, and puts maybe some dollars behind them, maybe some more policies, but to get rid of the policies that are failing. And the 65 mandates, of one of which is this exclusionary discipline mandate, have caused huge problems for our schools. I know this isn't the finance bill, but I do want to just mention these 65 mandates also had a huge effect on funding. We've seen districts, class sizes are getting bigger across the state. It should have been the opposite. We should have taken the money that we put into education and actually lowered class sizes, but that's not what's happened. What's happened is we have foisted mandates on districts. We have foisted policies on districts that make absolutely no sense, and things that are not helping our kids. In fact, they're harming our kids. The book banning is another example. This is another, something after a problem that doesn't really exist. Okay, so that's going to be a provision. That's what we're going to focus on when half of our kids can't read, when we've got disciplinary problems all up and down, when we have huge numbers of kids that aren't even attending school, and we're going to focus on things like that? That makes no sense, members. So I also, my hope, I had hoped that we would take our time and fix things, do things for our schools that are going to help educate our kids, that are going to help make teaching fun again and a wonderful career again, rather than making our teachers be essentially the disciplinarians, which they can't do, right, within the schools. And that's what's happened. So I also I encourage us to refuse to adopt, to refer this back to conference, and to actually fix education, because we are going to lose another year, a whole nother year. We've known about these issues and the reading issues for years. And last year, we did very little besides pass the READ Act to help. This year, we're doing nothing to help. And once we're going to have a whole nother generation of kids that are going to not do well in school, that aren't going to read, that aren't going to have their math. And it's a shame, because Minnesota used to be the leader, the absolute leader in education. And that was something we were all very proud of forever. And we aren't anymore. And we aren't. And it's because of policies that have been passed by this legislature over the last, several years that are more focused with things that harm the kids rather than things that help the kids. Thank you, Madam Chair.
The member from Anoka, Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. Thank you, Representative Bennett, for your motion to refuse to adopt, and for the comments you made in particular about this so-called book banning provision. It's really, like you said, it's a distraction from the bigger problems that our state faces in a lot of ways. And it's odd that it ended up in this conference committee report, given the fact that nothing like this passed out of the House at all. It just snuck in, I guess, through the Senate. But it's a distraction. It's a symbol. It says to a bunch of Minnesota parents, in particular, that your views aren't welcome. This is interesting, coming from the one Minnesota administration. But it's a distraction from the like Representative Bennett said, like Representative Bakeberg said, from the work that needs to be done to actually help make sure that everyone can read. Because to a student who can't read, every book is banned, like you said, Representative Bennett. That is absolutely correct. And reading proficiency since 2019 is down 16%. Over half of the kids in Minnesota, over half of the students in Minnesota can't read at grade level. That is what the administration should be focused on. That is what this bill should be focused on. I did also want to talk about how this is a distraction, though, from the work that needs to be done to restore a First Amendment culture in this state. I've heard this provision talked about as if it's some advancement of the First Amendment by telling certain parents that what you think about books that are in your school libraries, that you're wrong, that's somehow advancing the First Amendment. Well, we should be doing a lot of other work to advance the First Amendment in this chamber. And the good news is, in the last week, we just showed that some of that work is possible. Some of you may not know this, but we received word just a few minutes ago that House File 4109 was signed by the governor. That was passed off of this floor, I guess 8 days ago now. Movement in the right direction, finally, on a big First Amendment problem that was created last year by efforts to use the Human Rights Act to weaponize discrimination claims against faith communities and churches in particular. So we can do that work. We could have, in this education bill, we could have turned around the discrimination that was passed against faith-based colleges in the PSEO program. We could do something as a legislature about the surveillance database that's housed at the Department of Human Rights to track speech that the administration doesn't like. We could do something about the bills that were passed last year, signed by the governor, that ban political speech by certain speakers, corporations, while allowing it for other speakers. We could do something about the legislation that was passed last year that the governor has said recently, you go to jail if you're an employer and you give a certain kind of have a certain kind of captive meeting. The governor said recently that people are going to go to jail if they violate that law. We could do something about advancing First Amendment rights by fixing that problem. But instead, we're pretending to advance the First Amendment by doing this fake ban on book bans. Members, this is a distraction. This is a distraction from the real distortions and damage that was done to the First Amendment last year that we should be working on fixing this year. But instead, what we're doing is we're telling certain Minnesota parents that we don't care if your kids can't read.
Point of order, Madam Speaker.
Representative Jordan, please state your point of order.
Thank you. Under Mason's 124, personalities and questioning motives are not permitted in debate. Saying that this is what we're doing and this is what we want to tell parents is bringing motives into debate.
Members, just please be careful about the words that you choose. Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and absolutely I'm being very careful in the words that I'm choosing. The message that we are sending to certain Minnesotans today is that you're not welcome, that your views aren't welcome in one Minnesota. And instead of trying to make this a state that embraces a plurality of views, and instead of trying to make this a state in which all speech is allowed and not prohibited by the state of Minnesota, we're going down this road. It's unfortunate. We should get rid of this. We should do a lot of other work to advance First Amendment values, but we certainly should send this conference committee report back to conference committee. So thank you, Representative Bennett, for your motion. I urge member support.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Frazier.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I truly am sincere when I say I was not intending to speak on this bill conference committee report, but multiple times you've raised the issue around the book banning prohibition. So let me tell you what it actually does. What it does is it prohibits banning, removing, or otherwise restricting access to an otherwise age-appropriate book or other material from a school library based solely on the viewpoint, content, message, idea, or opinion conveyed. So the First Amendment protections you're talking about are absolutely protected. That's for all Minnesotans. We keep talking about one Minnesota. We want to make sure everyone's First Amendment views are protected. That's what this bill does. It requires folks to create a policy to do that, and that is what the bill does. That is great for all of Minnesota. We should want to allow the opportunity for materials to be present that will broaden the perspectives and the horizons of our kids. And I keep hearing the position taken that, well, kids can't read, so books are banned. Well, we're working on making sure that our kids can read. We can walk and chew gum at the same time. We're also making sure that we ensure that materials and books are available to broaden their horizons, which is important for our position as a global. We're creating global students to participate in this global economy. Thank you, Madam Chair.
The member from Goodhue, Representative Altendorf.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, members. Yes, I wanted to speak and thank you, Representative Bennett, for your motion to refuse to adopt this. With education, and this really should be our #1 priority as Minnesotans, for our children, for our future, and this is not acceptable, members. What is happening in our education system simply is not acceptable, nor should it be acceptable to any member in this chamber. The last 2 years have been incredibly detrimental to our schools, and yet this continues to fall on tone-deaf ears. We have our school systems, our superintendents, our school boards begging for relief, begging the majority party to listen. And I just believe this is actually quite, overwhelming to understand where the disconnect is coming. We absolutely need to send this policy back, this bill back to the committee. We need to give schools relief from the mandates. Members, this is completely irresponsible. Our schools cannot continue down this path. Members, I know you have schools over there that are hurting financially. I hear from them. I'm on the Education Finance Committee. I have taken meetings with them in my office because people from the majority party are not taking those meetings. So on the policies, we need to give relief on the mandates. And I just want to read real quick. In my district, in my district, Red Wing Schools, they're looking at a $2 million deficit. $2 million. Sorry, it's very difficult for me to read at my age. So this is after Red Wing Schools just had a referendum in 2022. From the school board meeting, I just want people of Red Wing to know that the initial referendum promises were made and kept. 2022 referendum, folks. Promises were made and kept. The superintendent did their job, the school board did their job. You know who did not do the job? Right here in this body. We put mandates over mandates on our schools, 65 new mandates. They're unfunded. They don't have the money. From the Red Wing paper, whoops, I'm really having trouble. This is a quote. It hurts so much to have these conversations, and I want our community to know that none of this is taken lightly. They are looking at how they're going to make cuts. Byron School, which is not in my district, but is just in southeast Minnesota. Here's the headline from Byron School. Byron Public Schools approve list of reductions as part of a multi-year budget cut process. $2 million in budget cuts required. Members, how did that happen after a record amount of new funding going to our schools? $2.2 billion. Remember the headlines? $2.2 billion record funding for our schools. You remember this. And now this year, 1 year later, you're going to pass this with giving no relief when nearly every district is suffering financially? Our schools need relief. Now, last time I spoke on this bill, I asked the majority party, I challenged them, I think very nicely and respectfully, for one person to tell me that their school was satisfied or happy with what happened in the 2023 session. I asked one person to stand. Well, that person who did is no longer in the chamber, but I was going to ask Representative Hicks today if she was aware of the school board meeting that just happened on Monday. So on this floor, she said her school was happy with what happened in 2023. Rochester Schools, $19.4 million deficit. $19.4 million deficit in Rochester Schools, and that's after a $10 million gift from Mayo. Minnesota, the majority party has absolutely left education. This is going back to the local taxpayer, and it is quite disgusting. The estimated referendum in Rochester will increase costs $362 per household. Rochester Schools. Madam Speaker, may I ask Representative Smith to yield to a question?
He will yield. Representative Altendorf.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Smith, have you talked to people in the Rochester school districts? Are they prepared for a referendum that is going to increase their property taxes on average $60 per month? And is this something that the Rochester community is prepared to take on?
Representative Smith.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm not going to speak for my whole community. Obviously, that referendum will come out, and they will speak on that themselves if they want to do that or not to do that. We are in communication with our school board. A lot of the financial hardships we're in is not because of the last even 5 years. It actually is something that happened a decade ago that we are still recovering from, and that's why this referendum is being discussed. So I'll leave it there.
Representative Altendorf.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Representative Smith. You know what? Minnesotans aren't buying it. They're not buying it. You can keep on saying these political talking points all day long. $19 billion surplus, $2.2 billion increase to our schools. They're not buying it. The superintendents are not buying it. The teachers are not buying it. The students are not buying it. $19 billion surplus, and you're going to try to tell us that we could not fund the schools?
Point of order, Madam Speaker.
Representative Long, please state your point of order.
We are pretty far away from the refusal to adopt, so Mason's 101, confining your remarks to the subject of debate.
Members, please articulate reasons that a person should vote either for or against the motion to refuse to adopt. Representative Altendorf.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Representative Long, because I would like to reiterate everything I'm talking about is absolutely why I am supporting Representative Bennett's motion to refuse to adopt, and that is because our schools are just incredibly hurting. You only need to do a simple Google search to see the schools that are looking to have to do new funding for referendums. They are looking at huge budget cuts. And the majority party is tone deaf.
The majority party is absolutely not listening. Right now, we could have, with 4 days left of this legislative session, we could absolutely send this report back to the committee, take these burdens off of our schools, and give them a great gift so that that doesn't need to go back to the local taxpayers and be the burden of the taxpayers. Thank you, members. Please vote green. Listen now, green is in support of your schools. Green is in support of sending this back and taking the mandates away so that we can allow our schools to function locally. Thank you.
The member from Cass, Representative Knudsen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, I would like to start off by just saying I am happy to hear that the MCA release date did not get pushed back to December, and it is currently staying at September 1st. But I think that that's something that we need to look to in the future to make even earlier. As much time possible. The earlier our school districts have this information, the earlier our school boards have this information, the earlier parents have this information, the better opportunity for course correction for our students. The 1-year extension on the mascot change deadline, that's just a Band-Aid. That gives them 1 more year, but that doesn't provide any funding. And they're telling us we don't have the money to do this. Another mandate, another unfunded mandate that our schools are now suffering because of. We could have done better there. Book banning. It's been said several times, but it needs to be said several more. To a child that can't read, every book is banned. We are in a crisis in Minnesota. Since 2019, reading proficiency is down 16%. Math proficiency is down 17%. Science proficiency is down 23%. We're not fixing that. As a matter of fact, the READ Act, which was passed last year, we're now rolling it back. We're playing yo-yo with our schools. They can't take this anymore, you guys. I hear from them all the time. I actually was texting with one of my superintendents yesterday. They can't take this anymore. We could have done better. This conference committee report could have been better. Local control, we continue to chip away and chip away and chip away at local control. Placing power at the department, which, by the way, grew by 21% last year. Placing power at the department does not help our students. Our school boards, our educators, and our parents know their students best. We need to give them the control. We need to give them the ability to meet individual needs within their schools. A one-size-fits-all, that doesn't work. This conference committee report could have been much, much better. Thank you, Representative Bennett, for your motion to not adopt this. We need to focus more on local control. We need to help our students. We need to empower our parents. Empowering parents empowers our students. Members, please vote green on Representative Bennett's motion. Thank you.
The member from Wright, Representative Hudson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, members. I rise in support of Representative Bennett's motion to refuse to adopt this conference committee report. The conference committee report is a little bit schizophrenic. There's provisions in here that directly contradict one another. On the one hand, we're saying that we're going to prohibit book banning, which in and of itself is a complete and utter misnomer. What we're prohibiting with this bill is the curation of catalogs and curriculum for children, which is absurd on its face because you literally can't have a library or a school without the curation of content. We do not teach every book published, nor do we put it on the shelves of every library. We have to pick and choose. This belongs, this does not. This serves an academic purpose, this does not. This is appropriate, age appropriate, culturally appropriate, and I know you care about that because the provision that this is in conflict with is where we're revising the READ Act to require folks to go back through curriculum and learning materials to assess whether or not they are culturally and linguistically responsive. And what happens if we determine that they're not? Well, then MDE is going to ban them. Weird. Definitely schizophrenic. So in the same bill, we're prohibiting book banning and providing for book banning. And the effect of that is going to be that a select few people who are on an approved list of who gets to make this decision are going to be doing the effective banning. If you insist upon calling it that, which you shouldn't, it's curation. But only a select group of people are going to be able to curate what is placed in front of our kids. And it's not going to be our communities. And that's a problem. By my read of this, you're opening up our school districts, our MDE, ourselves, to potential litigation as a result of explicitly putting our thumbs on the scale of who gets to determine what is and is not culturally appropriate. It's a bad position for us to be in. It's sloppy legislation. It should be fixed before it's signed by the governor, and that is why we should vote green to refuse to adopt this Conference Committee report. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The member from Olmsted, Representative Quam.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And opportunities. That's what education's about. A great education provides the children of our communities and our state opportunities in life. A key priority in education must be reading. We thought we were making some progress, and many of us have already talked about how this is giving us doubts, sort of the yo-yo pulling back. But as Representative Hudson touched on, giving veto power over the effective, proven techniques that can be thrown out because of an opinion from an entity that's very related to what we're seeing across this nation on higher ed campuses, where the appropriate people get to choose which groups should be pushed and promoted. And if you're not one of those groups, even in Minnesota, we have Minnesota students scared to go on campus, to go to class, because they aren't the appropriate group. That is very disappointing, and effectively is banning people. So that's saying the majority can decide who matters. And that's been front and center in higher ed. And we have been trying here to focus on effective, proven reading techniques and materials, because we feel reading is a top priority of education. The other thing that a missed opportunity, there have been years of efforts to try and state that sexually explicit and pornographic materials should not be allowed in our schools. And that's being called a ban. I thought that was just being smart, because we need to let children be children and schools be focused on education. And it's not just some of us on the floor. You go across the communities, there are parents extremely upset. And successful school districts, they pair with, they partner with, they have the parents and the community involved. And sound bites seem to be the priority as opposed to effectively in the conference committee report trying to address and improve problems. And not one of us on this side isn't ready to stand up and talk about reading. And frankly, we should be talking until we actually can pass bills that are going to help that instead of giving and actually paying for entities to have veto rights over what works. Schools in my area, and I have people in my district that are in the Rochester School District. I have people in the Rochester School District, not in my district, calling and talking to me. And the problems they're seeing aren't from 10 years ago, as was mentioned earlier on the floor. Although some of them probably started back some years ago. The problems are when the state of Minnesota takes away the rights of the people in the district, those school boards, those parents, teachers, and community, to do what is best for their students. I thought, and it might be in that book that some of you are reading right now, I thought that we cared about the individual, the differences, the diversity. And if we do, then we are for allowing the options and control be with the people that just don't, it's not the name, they know the faces, they know the community, the families, they know what makes that kindergartner smile and enjoy school. And they know what you can do to keep the attention and keep, there are so many things that should be local, but yet it's mandate after mandate, year after year, piling on. And if you're trying to fix those few districts that are broken and have been broken for decades, have been denying quality education for decades, then address those schools specifically. Don't say we're going to change everyone to fix the problem, because what you've done, and it was put forward by another member, schools in my area are having multi-million-dollar deficits caused by what has been done in the past several years on this House floor. We're talking right now about education, but those shortcomings are hitting from the mandates that are saying, we hired you for 9 months. You knew you were going to work 9 months, but now we're going to change it so, no, you're going to be considered unemployed after, in between the school year, and you're going to increase the costs to the schools. And that might not be bad if you're a school getting, 30, 40% better than the state average. But the districts around me and my area with exceeding the state average in reading at grade level, math at grade level, science at grade level, graduation rates exceeding. It's very common to have schools in my area with 100% graduation. But now you're forcing them into statutory operating debt. You've pushed them to the point of where they can no longer provide the quality education to their kids. And it's not their fault. So I guess the books you're reading now are much more interesting than facing the facts and the reality that this conference committee report actually makes it worse for our schools, for our kids, our teachers, and our communities. And vote green or just continue reading the books and giggling. And I know that that's probably not appropriate, but the last week of the legislature, it is frustrating, months and months, working to be heard, to get things in, and I guess being ignored.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Nadeau.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. I rise to encourage everyone to support the motion to refuse to adopt, and it's for a simple. There's a couple of reasons, and I'm not gonna go long. If nothing else, just to end the frustration that we go through here on these conference committee reports. We had two examples this morning, Madam Speaker, of conference committee reports that everyone had played a part, and you appointed great conference committees, and there was push and pull, there was back and forth, and they came out, and there was agreement on these things. And this side, your side, everybody in this room, I think, believes in the importance of education. It's probably the most important thing that we do. But if we can't agree here that we need to listen to teachers, that we need to focus on mental health. And there's some of these things in this bill, but honestly, members, if this bill goes back and doesn't pass, it won't matter. Because there's not one thing in this bill that I can see that actually will work to improve academic outcomes. It's all based on instead of focusing on the purpose of education and on that excellence that we're trying to find, members, this is all about provision. That's up to school districts. Let them do their thing. We need to get back to the point where this body focuses on the purpose of education and allows school districts and teachers and parents to focus on the provision of that education and hold them accountable. Members, support the motion to refuse to adopt. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The member from Chisago, Representative New Brindley.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. This is an interesting discussion, and the bottom line, and frankly, to what Representative Nadeau was saying, is this is what, 120 pages-ish, 120-page bill-ish that just doesn't solve problems. I like to say that there's a lot of things that we do to make adults feel better that don't actually do a darn thing to help kids. And this bill is an excellent example of that. We've been talking a lot about the science of reading, and actually, I wish we were talking more about the science of reading. We've been talking a lot about the problem of illiteracy among our children. And all of my children were homeschooled when they were young. And I was a mom who was not real interested in things like birthday parties for 4-year-olds. Like, I really struggled with those kinds of celebrations. But it was a very big deal in our house when a kid learned how to read. It was a very, very big deal. And in fact, when kids are little and they're learning, there comes a point when things just start to click, right? And it's a different age for everyone. I tell you what, one of my kids was reading Lord of the Rings at 7 years old. We read it at about the same time, and he understood it better than I did. It was amazing to me. I knew that kid was special in that way. I have another kid who really didn't pick up on reading till she was probably 8 and really just kind of struggled with it. But our rule in our house was, regardless of when that age came, I stopped everything else. For a month or whatever it took, All we did was read, 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 read. That's all we focused on. And I'm very pleased to say that I have 5 very proficient readers. But it was a focus for us. We cared about it, and we knew that literacy, knowing how to read, that is the path to learning. I knew that if my kids could read proficiently, the sky's the limit. They can learn anything they need to learn. So while we didn't have birthday parties and things, as soon as they became a proficient reader, and we had a specific book that we got through at that point, and if they could get through that book, we had a reading party. And this was a big deal reading party, like every mom's nightmare, like Chuck E. Cheese. Whatever the kids wanted was what we did for that reading party, because learning how to read was the most fundamental thing that a kid needs to learn. That's it. And so we've got this distraction. This conversation about book banning is a distraction, because it's been said before, but every single book is banned to a child who does not know how to read. Every book is banned to a kid who can't read. Now, I think it's also interesting, and I think it's important that we note that during the Walz administration, reading proficiency has dropped 16%. 16%. It has actually declined in that time. Not to mention math declining 17% and science declining 23%. And yet, graduation rates remain constant. We are graduating kids in this state who cannot function. They might be able to get by, right? Without math proficiency, science, they might be able to get by. Those kids are not getting by without reading proficiency. But we're graduating them anyway. We should absolutely refuse to adopt this report, send it back, and actually do something to help kids. Instead of making adults feel better, like, hey, we did something. No, you didn't. No, you didn't. There is nothing in this bill that is actually going to help a child. And Representative Anderson addressed the fact that families are choosing to forego public school at this point. They are withdrawing their kids from public school. It happened in droves during the pandemic when we kept kids away from the learning environment. But families have not gone back. They figured out that public school is failing them, and so they have not gone back. Families are turning to homeschooling, or private school, or charter schools. But Democrats have an answer for that too, don't they? We'll show them. Let's go after not everybody. Let's not make sure that everyone is following the same policies and procedures. Let's just go after the charter schools, those evil charter schools that are dipping into our private school mafia. Excuse me, our public school mafia. We'd hate to have any school that might dip into what we've got going on. And so we're going to say, for you charter schools, we're going to reduce your aid if you don't follow all the rules exactly. Now, I'm a rule follower. We should follow all the rules exactly. But you know what we should do? We should apply this to all the schools equally. We're just going to go after the charter schools. Forget the fact that the Minneapolis school district a few years ago was spending millions of dollars on credit cards. They weren't following procurement policy, but Democrats didn't go after them, did they? Nope, we're just going to go after charter schools. And it's because charter schools, home schools, private schools, they eat into our business as public schools. They eat into our business. So we're going to go after them. But we're going to leave public schools alone on that front. It's so ridiculous. And frankly, I don't know if you're aware, my Democrat friends, just how transparent it is. It is embarrassingly transparent. It's embarrassingly transparent that you don't want families to have options. You don't want families to have options, but you also don't want to make sure they can read. You don't want to make sure they can read, and you're already rolling back reforms intended to change reading instruction in this state. You're already rolling them back. You're more concerned about surrendering to this radical ideology and banning curriculum than on whether or not kids can actually read. This is agendas over academics. That's what this is. This is surrendering to your radical ideology and agendas.
Point of order, Madam Speaker.
Instead
Representative
of actually teaching people to
Latune, for what
read.
purpose do you rise?
Representative New Brindley is clearly assigning motives to what we're doing here with this conference committee report, and I suggest we move on.
Representative New Brindley, Mason's manual, section 124, personalities not permitted in debate, not questioning motives. Paragraph 1 is avoid personalities. Paragraph 3 is avoid motives of a member. Representative New Brindley.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd love to have a discussion about that.
That's not what we're on right now. We're on a motion to refuse to adopt.
Because it is not calling anyone's personalities into question or motives to talk about the contents of the bill. And this bill, the language of this bill, surrenders to radical ideology and agendas instead of academics. That's the result of the bill language.
Representative Hollins, for what purpose do you rise?
Masons 124, we're not allowed to bring motives into the conversation. Representative New Brindley is saying literally this is why Democrats are doing something, which is bringing motives into the conversation.
Representative New Brindley, please confine your remarks to what's permitted under Mason's 124. Representative New Brindley.
Let me say again, the language of this bill surrenders to radical ideology and agendas instead of academics. That is the language of the bill. That is what this bill does. It doesn't solve a problem. It does nothing to further the education of our children in teaching them to read, in bringing them up to grade level so that, frankly, they can choose whatever book they want to read. Because right now, less than half the kids in this state have that ability. Less than half the kids in this state have the ability to go to their library, pick up a book that should be age appropriate, and read it. They can't do it. And this bill only perpetuates that problem. It does nothing to fix it. It continues the problem of every book being banned for a child who cannot read. Let's stop doing these fiddling around the edges, making adults feel better. Let's stop patting ourselves on the back saying, look at this, I'm doing something. And let's actually do something. And this bill doesn't do it. Let's refuse to adopt, send it back to committee, and actually come up with a product that helps kids.
The member from Isanti, Representative Johnson.
Madam Speaker, members, I actually can't say it better than Representative New Brindley did. This bill does need to go back, and thank you, Representative Bennett, for the motion. Now, there's a lot of things that we could talk about on this bill. We've talked about the fact that just about 53% of our third graders cannot read at proficiency. Over 50%. Yet we're undoing the things we did last year to try to get them to learn better, try to teach them to read. We're rolling them back and getting rid of the science of reading, which actually works. You're taking something that works and throw it in the trash and bringing back stuff that we know already didn't work. That's brilliant. Now, what happens when the student isn't proficient at reading? Reading proficiency is down 17%. Guess what? If you can't read the word problems in the math class. That's down even more. And if you can't read, you can't understand the science project, which is down 23%. This bill does nothing to help our students. It might be great for the teachers, but I'm more concerned about the students. The students are our future. Without an education, what's our future look like? Now, there's another issue that was talked about, our discipline. I've heard more and more where a student is disruptive, 25, 27 kids in the class, one being disruptive. Guess what? 26 of them the teacher brings out of the room, lets the student that's being disruptive have control of the room, while we have 26 other students not learning. Not learning how to read. Not learning to do their math. Not learning science. Instead of holding the one child accountable and dealing with that one, they're disrupting the entire class, pulling them out from their chance of an education because of one that won't behave. How about if we switch things around? Take that one down to the principal's office and get those other 26 kids the education they deserve, that we pay for, that we expect. Because if a child is unable to read, every book is banned. And when we ban them, they have no opportunity at an education. No opportunity to get ahead for a better life. To a possibility to obtain that generational wealth for their families, to buy that home, to have a wonderful life. It makes me wonder what the agenda is. Graduation rates are stagnant. I'm actually glad with these numbers. Reading down 16%, math 17%, science 23%, 53% of third graders can't read. I'm surprised that a graduation rate is stagnant at a whopping 83%. That's right, we got rid of the graduation standards a couple of years ago. So we don't know if they're actually meeting the standards for graduation. We're just graduating them, giving them a diploma that's worthless. We need to actually start keeping our students accountable, make sure they do their work, make sure that they can read so they can do the math, do the science. It is frustrating with some of the stuff we see in these bills. Mandating our schools and our school boards to do things, making sure they have plans to do this, making sure that they do that, and some of them don't even have that problem in their school. Now with these numbers, reading down 16%, math proficiency down 17, science down 23, less students going to the public schools. We saw that after COVID because many parents saw what was going on in the schools. A lot of times it wasn't teaching how to do things. Some of them contacted me and they said they're done because they don't want the agenda being pushed. We have a problem that we need to fix. And it starts by sending this bill back to conference committee to actually get a bill that'll help our students. Please support the Bennett amendment motion.
The clerk will take the roll on the Bennett motion. Will the clerk please call the names of the members who are voting remotely?
Carroll.
Carroll, no.
Carroll, no. Pulowski.
Pulowski, no.
Pulowski, no.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 59 ayes and 69 nays, the motion does not prevail. We are on the motion to adopt. All those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, please say no. The motion prevails. The clerk will give the bill its third reading as amended by conference.
Third reading, Senate File Number 3567, as amended by conference.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Long.
Madam Speaker, I move that we put the conference committee report to Senate File 3567 on the table.
Representative Long moves that we put Senate File 3567 on the table. All those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, please say no. Motion prevails.